Welcome back to another session of Relationship Revolution. We're going to talk about the second level of solutions, and that is love your neighbor as yourself. Because the first was love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the foundation. The second is love your neighbor as yourself. Practically, the way I think about love your neighbor as yourself is maintain positive emotional bank accounts with everybody around me. I first read about the emotional bank account in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but since I've read about it from sources earlier than his, so I don't know who originated that concept. But the concept basically is, if I have a positive emotional bank account with you, you want to be around me and are willing to, at least to some extent, to be influenced by me. All right? The challenge is that emotional bank accounts can get overdrawn. Here's a challenge. Let me just talk about advice and encouragement. All right. I noticed the difference between advice and encouragement when I was watching groups go through low obstacle courses at a place I used to work called Discovery Ministries, and I was a facilitator, a wilderness adventure team training place. And we had a low obstacle course where one person would go through and everybody else in the group would just kind of hold their hands out to keep that person from, well, to help that person fall well when the person fell. Now, going through that course was exciting and tantalizing, and oh boy, every ounce of your person was involved in it. But being the spotters around the edge all day long, watching one person after another go through the same obstacles, got to be pretty old. But something I noticed was how the spotters interacted with the person on the wires and the ropes really affected the person's ability to go through the obstacle. And so I started really watching, and here's what I noticed. When people gave advice to the person on the rope, the person struggled more. When people gave encouragement to the person on the rope, the person had an easier time going through the obstacle. And actually, that's where I came to figure out the definition of advice and encouragement here. Advice is telling somebody what to do. Encouragement is pointing out to somebody what they are doing well or what you appreciate about what they are doing. Think about that. When do you like to receive unasked for advice? Hardly ever. And how do you respond when somebody gives you unasked for advice? Hey, you need to move that, you need to use red crayons instead of blue crayons. Who are you? I know what color I want to use. Why would you tell me what to do? That's just our natural response to advice. How about encouragement? When do you like for somebody to tell you that you did a great job or that they really appreciated? Hey, I really appreciated the way you drove. I felt safe the whole way. Who doesn't like to hear that? You like to hear it all the time. So I started experimenting and having groups just encourage, and it was amazing what the difference was. Here's the challenge that we came to, and I came to this after talking to many groups and debriefing their experience, but then I read it later in research that one researcher has proven that negative inputs have 5 times the impact on our lives as positive ones. And here's what we think about the emotional bank account. Advice is a withdrawal of 5. Encouragement is a deposit of 1. Ooh, that's tough. Think about that as a parent. Parents, as a parent or a teacher or even a manager, do you want the people, your kids, your employees, your students under your authority to want to be around you and to want to be influenced by you? Yes. So what does that mean? That means you have to give encouragement 5 times more often than you give advice. Does a parent have to give a child unasked for advice? Yes. So the wise parent builds up the emotional bank account knowing that you're going to have to make a withdrawal at some time. The challenge with this is, so we've just discussed, when you're struggling, you want encouragement rather than advice. But when you see somebody else struggling, what do you want to give that person? I've asked thousands of people that question, and the universal answer is, I want to give them advice. I want to help them. But what advice says is, you're a little less intelligent, a little less capable than me. So let me fix your life. None of us like that. I asked I started asking teenagers when I was doing training with them. I quit asking them, do you listen to your parents? The answer was universal. Very few teenagers listen to their parents. So I started asking them, why don't you listen to your parents? And the answer I consistently got was, because they're constantly talking and giving me advice. It's kind of like somebody living by a railroad track. You just get used to the noise of the train and you start ignoring it, and pretty soon you just don't hear it. Oh, think about that. What implications does that have for being a parent, a trainer, a teacher, a manager, a business leader? I actually had this conversation with a volleyball team, a girls volleyball team, and they won the state champion this year that I worked with them. It's not just because I worked with them. I'd love to say that, but they were already skilled when they came in. However, we really figured out an application for this advice versus encouragement and emotional bank account stuff. So I asked them, what do you do? We were discussing, how does a volleyball team overcome the slumps? You've watched volleyball games, you know, a team starts making all these points and all of a sudden they just go into a slump and it seems like they can't do anything. So I asked the girls, what do you do when somebody makes a mistake? And they said, we pat each other on the hiney and say, shake it off, forget about it. And then a light bulb just went off for me, because I'd been studying this advice and encouragement for years at that point. I said, what is it? And the girls thought about it for a moment. The bad hit. And I explained to them that mountain biking illustration with Chris that I talked about in the previous video about love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the basic principle is you do with your body what you picture in your mind. Your body goes where your mind looks. So if you tell somebody, shake it off, you're putting the picture in their mind of the bad hit they did, and what are they more apt to do next time? And the light bulb went off for the girls. Oh, that's why we go into slumps, because we put the wrong pictures into each other's minds. What could we do instead? Instead, we could do encouragement. So what they figured out to say was, if somebody made a bad hit, another of their teammates would come up instantly and say, hey, I want to see a hit like you did 3 times ago, that great hit with perfect form that scored a point. I want to see that hit again. And wouldn't even talk about the bad hit. Because what picture are you putting in their mind then? You're putting in good form and good hits and a successful thought. And so the person is more apt to do that. At the end of that volleyball season, when the girls won the state championship, I found a couple of them at a restaurant, just wandered up and said, hey, so did that make a difference? That whole thing about advice and encouragement? And their eyes lit up. They said, oh yes, that made a lot of difference. But what we realized was the girls on the court were too involved in the game and were too trained to pat each other on the hiney and say, shake it off. So we couldn't untrain that. So what we did was made the bench responsible for encouragement, because the bench could stay focused on looking for what each person on the floor was doing well and screaming out to them that we wanted to see that again. And we're all convinced that that made a huge difference. Wow. Now that's just talking about advice and encouragement, withdrawals and deposits in the emotional bank account. When you add in the 5 love languages, which is Gary Chapman's work on the 5 love languages, the gift of giving gifts, touch, words of affirmation, time spent, and whatever the 5th one is that I can't remember, that you can look it up online. You think about doing the correct love language for a person adds deposits to their emotional bank account, but doing the incorrect one or doing nothing takes away withdrawals. It's more complicated than the simple way I've put it. I mean, love really takes effort. Maintaining emotional bank accounts with other people requires getting to know them and caring about them and intentionally making deposits in their emotional bank accounts. You can find these principles and more in my book, Muddling Along or Unity, Confessions of a Recovering Jerk. It's available at Amazon.com in print, Kindle, and audio formats. To learn how to practice these principles with me, go to DialogueDojo.com.